He always carried money like a heavy coat, folded, worn at the edges, something that protected him sometimes and chafed him more often. As a boy he learned the stories, "We don't have that, money doesn't stick to people like us." Those sentences settled into his bones. Now, in midlife, they still rose in his throat when bills piled up or an opportunity knocked. On a grey morning, sunlight cutting through the kitchen blinds like a sliver of permission, he sat with a cup of coffee and a wallet that seemed to echo with old refusals. I watched him there, not as a stranger but as someone who has walked beside many who carry the same tired script. He ran his thumb over the worn leather, a small ritual of resignation, and muttered to himself, "It's always been this way." His partner passed by, offered a smile meant to comfort and a phrase meant to fix, "We'll get through it," and he smiled back the way people do when hope is polite but thin. Something gentle shifted that morning. Not an epiphany like a lightning bolt, more like a radio dial finding a clear station. Curious, he asked the question he had never allowed himself, "What if money is listening to how I feel?" The thought sounded ridiculous and dangerous, it also felt oddly true. His chest loosened a fraction. The tightness that had been his default response to bills and bank statements softened like clay warmed by hands. In that quiet, I became his guide, a steady voice reminding him that the currency of attraction isn't only numbers, it's frequency, feeling, rhythm. We began simply, name the feeling under the fear, breathe into it, notice how it trembles. He practiced small shifts, a slower exhale when a past debt surfaced, a brief gratitude for a small sale, a short morning ritual that tuned his internal dial toward quiet trust. Each tiny recalibration changed something unseen, posture, vocabulary, the way he answered the phone. If this lands with you, give it a quiet like and stay with me, and tell me, what's your biggest financial pain? In the next moment, he tests that new signal against real resistance, and the result surprises him. He wakes before dawn, the house still breathing in the cool hush. Coffee steams in a chipped mug, bills sit like small accusations on the kitchen table. He remembers his father's phrases, "The economy is tough, money doesn't grow on trees," words that braided themselves into his bones. That weight shows in the little things, the hesitation when he opens a bill, the quickness in his shoulders, the automatic script of worry that plays in his mind. In this quiet scene, the mentor's voice arrives, not as a lecture, but as a gentle question, "What are you feeling right now?" He answers without theatrics, "Fear." Smallness. Not enough. The answer is neither wrong nor shameful, it is simply a frequency. The mentor guides him to notice how that frequency moves through the body. Fear tightens the chest, speeds the breath, narrows the aperture through which abundance might enter, the voice explains. They walk through a daily rhythm reset, simple, dignified actions that change the signal. Slow inhale, long exhale. A small ritual each morning, place one bill or a single saved coin into a jar labeled with gratitude, write a sentence of what he wants as if it's already unfolding. The act is tiny, almost silly, yet the mentor insists the interior shift is everything. Prosperity answers the vibration you emit, the mentor says, not just the calculations in your head. At first, nothing dramatic happens. He tests the idea with skepticism and tenderness, practicing the ritual between the grocery list and the commute. Then a small, undeniable thing, a vendor he hadn't expected calls with a partial refund, a client praises his work and promises future business, his chest relaxes by an inch. These are not miracles, they are confirmations that the signal changed and reality nudged in response. Inside him, shame loosens its grip and curiosity blooms. He begins to replace self-blame with questions, what feeling am I sending, and the questions open doors he had long kept closed. If this resonates, lightly tap like and tell me in the comments what your biggest financial pain is, your honesty will shape the next step. In the next scene, we'll move from quiet experiments to a focused practice that amplifies that new frequency, turning those small confirmations into steady momentum. He led him back to the small kitchen where morning light slid across the worn table, where bills once piled like silent accusations. The mentor didn't hand over a formula, he handed a question. What does money feel like to you, right now? He asked, not as a test but as an invitation. The man closed his eyes, the old stories rising, tightness in the chest, the steady drum of not enough. The mentor leaned in, voice steady as a lighthouse. Your feelings are the radio signal. Tune the station and the world will answer. They began with something almost ridiculous in its simplicity, a 5-minute ritual at dawn. No jargon, no visuals, just presence. He smelled his black coffee, felt the weight of the mug, and named 3 small, true things he appreciated. The first shift was subtle, a loosening in the jaw, a smudge of color returning to a face that had lived in grayscale. The mentor watched, then guided the next step, softened the thought that said you must scramble for every cent, replace it with a question, not a demand. What could I create today that adds value? The man tried it and found his mind stopped circling its fear and began to notice possibilities. Scenes followed like steady beats. He practiced saying a price that felt fair, not apologetic. He negotiated with curiosity instead of desperation. He kept a tiny ledger where, each evening, he wrote one small win, a paid bill, an unexpected coin, a clear decision. Over weeks these simple acts rewired a rhythm. The fear that had once dictated choices now had less attention. Confidence, like a muscle, strengthened with repetition. The mentor taught him to listen for frequency, how irritation, gratitude, scarcity, and trust each hum at different pitches. When he learned to raise his baseline feeling, opportunities arrived that matched that tone, calls, offers, the rare chance to say yes without panic. The transformation wasn't instantaneous glamour, it was steady, honest, a daily practice that changed the trajectory of his life. If this lands with you, tap like and tell me, what's your biggest financial pain? In the next moment of this journey, he will be shown the first concrete alignment ritual that shifted his whole relationship with money. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, catching the edges of envelopes like small, accusing moons. He sat hunched, a mug cooling in his hands, the old scarcity stories replaying like a scratched record. Money is scarce. You must fight for every cent. The seasoned guide stood in the doorway, not grand or flashy, just a presence that smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. Sit with it, she said, voice low and steady. Name the feeling. Where does scarcity live in your body? He did. It was a tightness beneath the ribs, a clenching in the throat. When he spoke, the words came small. Anxiety, not enough. The guide leaned in, not to fix but to witness. Good. Feeling is the signal. We won't argue with it. We will change the channel. She taught him a simple sequence, 3 breaths, eyes closed, a slow, deliberate inhale that widened the heartbeat, an exhale that sank the shoulders. Imagine a faucet, she said, one that opens not with effort, but with the willingness to let softer feelings through. He pictured his life as a radio dial. When he tightened, the static grew. When he softened, music slipped in. The first practice was not a long ritual, but a daily appointment with ease, 5 minutes each morning of breath, a 3-sentence gratitude list, and one small, symbolic act of trust. He folded a single dollar into an envelope labeled receive and placed it on the counter. It felt ridiculous, then strangely liberating. She shared examples, quiet and practical. A neighbor who shifted his morning walk into a time of visualization and landed a steady client within weeks. A woman who began paying herself first, even $10, and watched opportunities multiply in unexpected forms. Action matters, the guide reminded him, but feeling is the code. Align the two and your daily rhythm becomes a signal the world answers. As he practiced, the tightness loosened. Decisions arrived with less panic and more curiosity. Small wins, a returned call, a bill restructured, a calm sleep, stacked like stepping stones. If this beginning lands with you, a simple like helps this message find others who need it. What is your biggest financial pain right now? Stay with me, and next we'll translate these shifts into a clear, repeatable routine that anchors that new frequency in your life. He lingered at the kitchen window, the city waking in thin gold, and the old story about money, loud and weary in his bones, whispered like a neighbor he couldn't ignore. The mentor sat across from him, calm as a lighthouse, and asked a question that felt like a small earthquake. What if money is simply responding to how you feel, not to how hard you try? He laughed at first, nervous and brittle, then the laugh dissolved into something quieter. The scene holds, the steam from their cups, the neighbor's dog barking twice, a bass sighing past. Inside him a tension loosened, like a rope after a knot is cut. They began to map the emotional code, the small frequencies that tune your life. Gratitude, not as a morning checklist but as an embodied warmth in the chest, curiosity replacing panic, steadiness as a posture you practice like a muscle. The mentor showed him how to name a feeling, not to argue with it. When fear arrives, don't feed it with scarcity stories, she said. Offer it a different frequency, a small, believable proof of abundance. He remembered a $20 bill found in an old jacket, the smile it brought, and how small evidence had once altered his day. They built from there a 5-minute rhythm of breath and appreciation before work, a brief ritual to celebrate every dollar earned, a deliberate pause before a purchase that asked, "Does this align with my trust in abundance?" Practicality threaded through the warmth. They rewired daily rhythms, mornings for alignment, afternoons for focused work, evenings for reflection. He began to change language, no more "I can't," replaced by "I am learning to receive." Real-world shifts followed, a client who had ghosted him reappeared, a modest side project grew steadier, and with each small win his posture changed, his voice carried more ease, his decisions reflected a quieter confidence. Doubt showed up, of course, but now it was a signal, not a dictator. If this resonates, tap like and tell me in the comments, what's your biggest financial pain? Stay with him a moment longer, because the next step isn't just feeling different, it's taking aligned action that anchors that feeling into tangible income and opportunity. He sat at the kitchen table as the city stirred awake, the soft hiss of the kettle a metronome for a nervous heart. Across from him the mentor, calm in a worn sweater, voice steady like a lighthouse, watching more than speaking. "Listen to the feeling under the thought," she said, tapping the wood between them. "Not the story about money. The feeling that sits beneath it." He tried. At first there was only a tightness, the old scarcity tightening like a fist. Then, with guidance, a different sensation surfaced, a quiet, curious warmth that had nothing to do with numbers. They began small, surgical changes that felt oddly brave. Morning rituals replaced panic scrolling, a breath, 3 deliberate acknowledgements of what already worked, a ledger where he recorded not debts alone but the inflows, gifts, small returns, the cent he found in a jacket pocket. "Celebrate the signal," the mentor said. "You don't need a windfall to change your frequency, you need evidence that the universe hears you." He laughed at how ridiculous it felt to write down a $12 refund and place a sticky note that read, "I am supported." Yet each note was a recalibration, and each recalibration softened the old story. In a practical exercise she asked him to make one decision from a place of trust rather than fear. He paid himself first, an impossible-sounding line in his head, by transferring a modest amount to a savings jar and watching his pulse slow as he did it. "You just sent the market a message," she observed. "Not of want, but of value." Over dinner he practiced a different conversation with his partner, swapping resigned phrases for possibilities. The tone of their home shifted, even the toaster seemed less judgmental. Cinematic moments followed, an unexpected payment that arrived like punctuation, the sudden clarity in an email offering freelance work, the tacit gratitude that replaced nighttime worry. These were not miracles so much as new rhythms aligning, thoughts, feelings, and action synchronized into a steadier broadcast. He felt less like a beggar at a closed door and more like someone tuning an instrument until it played true. If this resonates, give it a like. Tell me, what's your biggest financial pain right now? Subscribe if you want to walk the next step with us. In the next part we'll practice the anchor ritual that sustained his new frequency and learn how to amplify it into steady, reliable income. He stood at the kitchen counter, sunlight cutting across last month's bills like a spotlight. The paper felt heavier than usual, not because the numbers had grown but because something inside him had shifted, a quiet curiosity that had replaced the old, exhausted belief that money was a fight he would always lose. Across from him, the mentor sat with a mug, watching the way his hands trembled as if reaching for a new language. "Listen," she said softly, "money answers feeling long before it answers strategy." Her voice was steady, like a lighthouse on a grey morning. They practiced a small experiment. She asked him to close his eyes and remember the first time he heard scarcity in his family, her memory, the smell of stew, the father's tired laugh. He felt the old knot tighten. Then she guided him to breathe into that knot and imagine it loosening, like a rope untying itself. Not pretending, she corrected gently, not wishful thinking. A recalibration, allowing yourself to feel deserving, to accept small wins without guilt. He opened his eyes, and the world looked, for the first time in a long while, as if it might hold possibility. The tests came quietly. A client called to push a payment forward. A neighbor recommended a part-time gig. He noticed his posture change before the good news arrived, his shoulders dropped, his speech slowed. Each small success was not a treasure chest but a signal, his frequency matching new outcomes. The mentor shared practical rituals, a 5-minute morning alignment where he named 3 things already given, a night practice of recording 1 financial victory, no matter how small, and a confidence ritual, standing in the mirror and stating, "I am capable of steady wealth." These felt almost ridiculous at first, until 1 month later, the bank balance whispered a different story. They walked through fear together. "What if it changes who I am?" he asked. She smiled, remembering her own resistance. "It changes what you habitually expect. That's all. The person you are becomes someone who trusts." In the pantry of his life, old cans of scarcity were finally being shelved. If this resonates, tap like quietly and tell us, what's your biggest financial pain? Stay with me. Next we anchor these shifts into daily rhythms that make abundance steady, not sporadic. He returned to the small kitchen where this all began, sunlight cutting a slice across the wooden table, the same chipped mug steaming in his hands. The mentor sat across from him, not as an instructor but as a companion who'd walked this road. "Frequency isn't abstract," she said softly. "It's a rhythm you cultivate. It lives in the way you breathe, the words you speak, the tiny rituals that reorder your nervous system." He nodded, skeptical and hopeful at once, and they began to practice. She guided him through a morning sequence, 3 slow breaths that anchor the body, a minute of eyes-closed visualization where he felt money as a warm, steady current rather than a distant prize, and a simple writing ritual, 3 things he would spend money on with gratitude. He almost laughed at the harmlessness of it, until the first time he actually paid a bill while silently thanking the service. The tension in his shoulders eased for the first time in years. They worked with language. "Replace I can't afford with I choose not to for now," she coached. The shift was subtle, but it altered his stance in conversations and negotiations. He practiced small, courageous actions, offering to coach a neighbor for a modest fee, listing 1 skill online, setting aside a deliberate micro-investment each week. Each action was an experiment in vibration, sending out a signal that said he expected reciprocity, not scarcity. There were setbacks. A late payment reminder would arrive like a test, and the old stories rose like smoke. The mentor taught him an emergency reset, 3 grounding breaths, a cash-in-hand gratitude statement, and a recalibration of posture, shoulders back, chest open, so his body aligned with the frequency he wanted to emit. He learned to watch feelings as data, not destiny. Small synchronistic returns began, a client call, a coupon that exactly matched an overdue bill, a conversation that led to paid work. Each coincidence reinforced the practice and, more importantly, rewired his belief. The camera lingers on his face, less tense, more curious, tracking a man learning to feel wealthy before the numbers appear. If this resonates, tap like and tell me in the comments, what's your biggest financial pain? Subscribe to stay with him. Next, we'll follow the moment his frequency produces an undeniable, life-changing return. He opened the window and let the morning in, light like honey sliding across the countertop, the kettle whispering steam. The house smelled of coffee and possibility for the first time in years. I watched him trace the rim of his mug and ask, half to himself, what if money isn't a fight? The question landed like a seed. We sat in that small, ordinary kitchen, nothing staged, no sudden miracle, and began to work like gardeners, not gamblers. Frequency isn't fantasy, I said. It's rhythm. It's how you feel before the invoice arrives. He laughed, a short, incredulous sound, and then he listened. That laugh was the crack where light got in. We mapped his mornings: 5 minutes of breath, 3 minutes of gratitude for what's already moving toward him, then a simple ritual, a single small purchase that honors his worth. Pay the barista like you expect good things, I told him. Buy the pen you want. Send a note that says thank you to someone who opened a door. These were not tricks, they were recalibrations. His body began to register permission. Fear didn't disappear, but it stopped running the meeting. In the first week he noticed tiny confirmations: a client replied faster, a returned call included an unexpected bonus, a used car he'd wanted appeared at a fair price. Each event was small, but together they retuned his nervous system to expect allowance instead of scarcity. We practiced language, too. When a bill arrived, he said, quietly, "This is moving through me," rather than, "This will ruin me." He practiced receiving compliments without correcting them. He set boundaries with work that drained him and asked for what he was worth in negotiations, voice steady. I watched his shoulders drop a fraction, his eyes held fewer debts and more plans. The path wasn't linear, an anxious night, a tempting old belief, but the reset stuck. By learning to feel prosperous first, he attracted the proof later. If this felt real for you, give it a quiet like and tell me, what's your biggest financial pain? Subscribe and come back for the last step, where we lock this new frequency into a simple, daily system that makes abundance feel inevitable. He stands in the same kitchen where scarcity once whispered in the corners, sunlight pouring across the counter like a quiet promise. The man you met earlier, tired, tight, accustomed to counting pennies, now breathes differently. He remembers the morning that changed everything: curiosity instead of panic, a question instead of blame. The mentor's voice returns, low and steady, guiding him back to the simplest truth they discovered together: money answers to frequency. Not magic. Not luck. A tuned signal sent by feeling, thought, and repeating small, honest rituals. You see his shoulders ease, the tightness around his chest softens into something like permission. He practices the morning pause, a short ritual of breath and gratitude that rewires his instinct from scarcity to allowance. He journals one sentence of worth, then acts on one small, confident choice that aligns with his value: a call he had avoided, a price he finally sets, a tiny investment in himself. Each act raises his vibrational signal, and the world begins to match it. Around him, ordinary scenes shift: an overdue bill met with calm planning, an unexpected opportunity that used to feel like threat now arrives as a choice. He still feels fear sometimes, it's human, but it no longer dictates the script. The mentor leans in, not to fix, but to remind: prosperity is practiced. Trust is grown by repetition. Confidence is a muscle you build with daily gestures that say, "I am worthy of this life." If you've watched this far, you know the map: mindset resets, confidence building rituals, alignment practices you can do tomorrow morning. If this touched you, leave a small like so others can find the path, and tell me in the comments, what's your biggest financial pain right now? Your answer matters, it helps me guide you with real, usable steps. If you want to keep walking this road, stay with me, I'll guide you through a practical, 5-minute alignment you can use every day, a next step to take the frequency we found and turn it into steady, unfolding abundance.